And what's up, my peoples? This is yours truly, Quasi Speaks, doing videos sharing my spiritual journey leading up to my decision to leave traditional religion and to walk away from Christianity. So, in my previous videos, I have shared with you my early childhood events and their significance leading up to now my early teenage years. So, again, let me just reiterate that the intent of these videos is to simply share with you what my spiritual journey looked like over the years, leading into becoming a born again believer following the Christian faith, doing research, and then ultimately coming to a resolve that I would leave traditional religion and the Christian faith. Now, I know there are some of you out there that have known me as a believer. You've known me as a Christian. You have known me as a minister of the gospel. You have known me as an evangelist. You've known me as a pastor. You've known me as a licensed and ordained elder of the Christian faith. You've known me as a fireball preacher. Yes, I was indeed all those things. And so in my videos, I want to simply share with you how I evolved to where I am right now as it relates to my spiritual journey. And I put emphasis on the fact that what I'm sharing is my spiritual journey, not necessarily my religious persuasions. Although I will talk about the part that religion played in my development to the person that I am today, the resolve that I presently have. And again, I must remind you, my videos are not intended in any way to suggest that you must give up what you believe. That is an intrinsic right of each individual to choose what they will believe. And that is perfectly all right with me. I am not against any for what they choose to believe. And in the same light, I would hope that you would view my videos with an open mind and with the same level of receptivity that I would extend to any sharing with me their spiritual journey, their belief. I have no qualms whatsoever with what an individual holds dear and true to themselves. So I want to jump right in, and I want to talk now about what uh, life was like for me during my early teens, leading up to my early adult life, my early 20s. So I left off in my last video talking about being a survivor of sexual assault, being repeatedly molested by a friend of the family, more like an extended family, because the person that was taking care of us were not blood related, but we considered ourselves family. And then being sexually assaulted by a stranger at the age of 10. So I shared those things openly because, number one, I'm not ashamed of my past. I had absolutely no control over the events of my past that traumatized me and that played a major role in how I perceived life. And I will tell you this, that my early encounters with people in particular played a huge role in how I perceived life. And so, like many young African American males today, we don't always get the opportunity to hear their story, to truly begin to try and understand why they are so angry, why they seem to be a people without any type of order to their lives, mostly because we really just don't take the time to try to learn who they are and understand why they are the way they are. Everyone, I believe, has a story to tell. Everyone has encountered something in their lives that has shaped their thought processes, that has spoken to how they receive information, how they respond to certain exterior stimuli. And so, as a people, we really need to do better trying to understand the human plight. The fact that we're having a human experience that will differ from the next person. No two people will have the same exact experience, and no two people will draw the same conclusions from any given experience. So, with that being said, I want to share with you that my early teen years leading up to my early 20s was a time frame that was filled with obscurity, numerous disappointments, many upsets. It was a turbulent time for me. When we're talking about, for instance, um, gang involvement with the Savage Skulls, becoming a warlord in one of the Brooklyn chapters, having the role of starting the ruckus, as the young people say now, uh, flashing our colors in neighborhoods where we knew there were rival gang members in those neighborhoods so that we can rumble. West Side Story, if you're familiar with that production, kind of tells the story of what it was like living in New York uh, during the times of street gangs. And there was a big thing, and I'm told by some of my peers that we still have street gangs in New York. They have not gone away. Just like right here in our state of Virginia, street gangs is still a concern to any neighborhood. So those were turbulent years for me. And to be perfectly honest with you, if you recall in my previous video, I talked about how I was introduced to the Christian church. Not necessarily the Christian religion, because I really didn't pay much attention as a young kid. I was more interested in skipping Sabbath school and going to Prospect Park, as I said before. But the few times that I did sit in, especially during vacation Bible school, that was fun. It was a lot of fun activities. And of course, the intent was to introduce to us as young children the religion, Christianity, and what the Christian faith looks like. So I didn't really have good parental guidance when it comes down to embracing the Christian faith and understanding the tenets of the Christian faith and what is called upon an individual as a believer coming into the Christian faith. So it was pretty turbulent, to for lack of better words. Then, when when I think about how I got away from the church, which it is no surprise to me when you don't have the type of guidance from your parents, um, because they themselves are really not that engulfed in the faith, let alone could really explain to you why, as a family, we've chosen Christianity over other religious persuasions. So, in the absence of that kind of guidance and daily instruction and encouragement and admonishment, it was very easy in my early teens to just completely stop going to church altogether. As I think back and reflect on those years, church really didn't seem that important to me, to be honest with you. As a young person, I didn't give thought to what happens when you die. I just knew that you lived, you enjoyed life, and eventually you would die. Um, it's not something that a young person thinks about, because when as a young person, you're more interested in having fun and enjoying yourself, not thinking about your mortality. you know and so it didn't play a big part in my life. That's the bottom line, really. It just did not play a big part in my life. I have little recollections of spending a great deal of time in the church. But during my time in the military, now mind you, at the age of 17, I left high school early. I did not graduate high school. I left high school early to go into the Marine Corps. And it was more by, I would say, a little bit of compulsion and desperation, to put it more accurately. See, here's what happened. I remember wanting to leave New York. I believe I was going into my first year, or had completed my first year of high school. I attended the former Alexander Hamilton Vocational and Technical High School on Albany Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. And I was on the gymnastics team there as well. I was a pretty decent student. I mean, as far as my academics, I wasn't struggling with academics. I was a pretty decent student, and I was an okay gymnast. I did the floor exercise, I did the rings, I did vaulting, I did the what else did I do? I think that was about it. And I was okay. I can compete. And I enjoyed it too. But I wanted to leave New York, and so I went and stayed with my grandparents, who are now resting in peace. They lived in Spotsylvania, Virginia, and I remember some summers we would go down, and I would spend the summers with them, and it was always fun and exciting. Although it was strange being a city boy going to a country setting, and no, you can't just walk to the corner store because the corner store is 8 miles away. I wasn't used to that. Uh, and then there's no street lights because you're on a country road, and your nearest neighbor is about a quarter of a mile. So those were some challenges for me as a young teenager. But I think I guess I must have been 16. Yeah, I must have been about 16 years old. And so when I left New York to go to Spotsylvania, and was enrolled in Spotsylvania County High, the school systems were vastly different as far as their curriculum structure. So instead of being put in the grade level that I would have been going to had I stayed in New York, I ended up actually repeating the grade level that I just completed in New York. So that left a sour taste in my mouth. That didn't go over well. However, I made the adjustment, I dealt with it, and I did the best that I could. But it was more challenging than I anticipated it would be, Not so much on the academic level because I enjoyed the school. I enjoyed my classmates. I enjoyed the school activities. In fact, I joined the gymnastics team, which, by the way, I was the only male on an all-girls gymnastics team. Boy, I was in heaven. But I had to learn flexibility moves as opposed to strength moves that I was accustomed to doing. And so that made me somewhat of a hit. That as a male I could do what was called in gymnastics a back walkover, you know. So that was exciting, but um, I didn't have a car, as did many of my schoolmates in high school. Many of them had vehicles, so I rode the school bus like some did. Um, didn't have the luxury of hanging out with any of my schoolmates because, again, my grandparents certainly were not going to be chauffeuring me all over Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania and Louisa County and Culpeper and all of the places where I had schoolmates and their friends. So the only places that I could visit was, as they would say, just up the road. I would go to the Banks house. I had a bit of a crush on one of the young ladies up there. Um, I had a big crush on her. I'll never forget these young ladies, Tat, Pumpkin, and Gloria. And so that was as far as I could go by myself. I could walk up the road about a quarter of a mile or so and spend a little time at their house. But other than that, I was hanging with my grandfolks. So whenever there was a weekend event, that's where I was. So it kind of became boring for me as a 16-year-old. Now, mind you, it gave me a break away from my gang activity and gang activities from New York. It did give me a break from there, but it was boring for me. And so, um, as that summer began to come to a close, I was like, you know what? I want to go back to New York. This is just not working for me. I'm a city boy. I'm not a country boy. Yeah, it was intriguing learning about cornfields and vegetable yards and horses and raising pigs to take to the slaughter and going to the chicken coop 4:30 in the morning to get eggs, but you got to watch out for snakes. And I think the thing that I did enjoy the most, I know it sounds like I'm rambling, but I'm trying to get out as I remember those years, because it's been some years now as I'm rapidly approaching 60. So I remember and enjoyed going fishing with my grandfather. Now that was enjoyable. Getting up early in the morning, getting the eggs out the chicken coop, getting those things out the way, feeding the chickens, feeding the hogs, and then loading up the boat and going to either Mineral or up the road to Branch Fork and buying some bait, and then going out on Lake Anna in my granddad's boat and fishing. That was exciting. I enjoyed that. That was very exciting for me. But outside of that, life for me then was quite boring. Now, mind you, church was very different, and this was something totally new for me. They attended church, if I remember right, every first and third Sunday. And so then second and fourth Sunday, there was no church unless there was some special event, So it was a true country setting, and everybody knew everybody. The Wool folks, the Branches, the Stubbs, the Banks, everybody knew everybody, and in some way or another, they were even related. I later found that out going back to the area, just trying to reconnect. So that's pretty much my extent of church with my grandparents. So when I moved back to New York, and I think this was the catalyst of events that led to my decision to leave school early. when I got back to New York and it was time to enroll back in school, I'm not sure how we picked the school that we did pick. I don't know if it was because of a zoning issue or because of the time of registering, because school had already started. So I would have been coming in the semester somewhat late. But I ended up at F.D. Roosevelt High School out in Bay Ridge, New York. Now, that section of New York back then in the late 70s and mid to late 70s was predominantly Italian, and there was some hostility with the Italians and African Americans. Now, I call them that because that is how it was introduced to me as a youngster, that you're African American. I don't lay hold of that identification. However, because of the system today that we have to function within, that is the only identifier that they give to us to identify ourselves as African Americans. But I'm not an African American, just like you don't have a European American, you don't have a Chinese American, you don't, that man did that. But that's a whole nother subject that I'm not going to get too much into. So, attending Bay Ridge, there was hostility there. So I think it was when I was visiting this school to get enrolled with my mother. Students met me on the steps as we were coming through the door and said, "You don't want to come here." And so that, of course, got my attention right away. And so as I began to look around, I noticed that, wow, the black population is very scarce. It was predominantly, now I didn't know they were Italians yet, but so my assumption or my observation was that, okay, this school is predominantly white. Okay, well, okay, I can deal with that. So when we were enrolling, that's when I found out that when they viewed my transcript from Spotsylvania County High, I was told the same thing that I was told when I went to Virginia, and that is because the school curriculums are so different, you'll have to do 6 months in the previous grade that you just completed, and if you fare well, then we'll put you in your regular grade to be able to move on time. Okay, so that didn't sit right with me. That began my dissent with the school system. And mind you, I was still carrying a great deal of suppressed anger, embarrassment, frustration, confusement from the trauma that I experienced at 10 years old. So I was still carrying that, and that had a great deal of impact on my juvenile involvements. So when they told me that, I said, you know what? Bump this, man. I'm not going through that again. So then I started making plans without my mother or stepfather's knowledge that I was going to leave school. And I knew that I had to be 18 to sign myself out of school. So I did not want them to know right up front what my plan was. And so what I did was I skipped school one day and I went down to the recruiter's office. And the Marine Corps appealed to me, mostly because when I looked at the video that the recruitment video that they show you, it resonated with me because I wanted to fight. I felt I had good reason to fight. Not fight for America. I just wanted to fight because I had so much anger pinned up inside of me that fighting seemed to be the only satisfactory release. So I said, wow, what better way to release this anger than to join an elite fighting force and go fight in a war, and not just any war. You know, then I'm thinking about Third World War. I'm like, yeah, this is gonna be on. So I signed up, went down there to Fort Hamilton, took the ASVAB test, scored rather well on the ASVAB test. Now, mind you, my folks still don't even have a clue that I am making plans to leave New York now, this time on my own, and go into the Marine Corps. They didn't know it yet. The only one that did know was my older brother, because we were going to try and go in on the buddy system that they promoted. You know, they promoted that if you were family, brothers, or if you were close friends, you can come in on what they called the buddy system. So I thought that was a great idea too, because I love my brother, my bigger brother. And I said, well, that'll be great, man. I'll have my older brother there with me. Oh, fantastic. Well, it didn't pan out that way. He ended up going to the Army. I went to the Marine Corps. So anyway, so my folks didn't find out until after we reviewed my ASVAB test scores, and my recruiter then presented me with the paperwork. And so, of course, my recruiter knew that I had not yet finished school, but it was my intent to leave school. So there was a specific document that needed to be signed by my parents or guardian. So that's when I presented it to my folks and told them, hey, look, this is what I want to do with my life. I'm tired of school. I feel like I've been given a raw deal, and I'm out. I'm not going to go to school. I want to go in the military. So I remember my stepfather, who is also now resting in peace. I remember my stepfather, and he was the father. He was the daddy that I grew up knowing. My biological father was not active in my early years. So I remember my stepdaddy telling me, well, I probably cannot make you change your mind, but are you absolutely sure that this is what you want to do? And without hesitation, I said, yes, sir. This is exactly what I want to do. And he said, okay. So they signed the waiver, because at 17 I couldn't sign legally binding contracts without their signature. So they signed the waiver for me, he and my mother, and I had a few weeks, not many, before I would ship out. So this would be December of 1978. So Christmas night I spent with the family, enjoying the Christmas season, and we had company over, and we had a good time. And then December 26, 1978, I was heading to Parris Island, South Carolina. That's how quick it was. And I arrived at Parris Island, South Carolina, early the next morning. It must have been about 4:30, and all hell broke loose. And that's putting it mildly. When that bus pulled onto the Marine Corps base, the boot camp training compound, I was met with nonstop yelling and screaming from seasoned Marine Corps drill instructors. And reality set in that, Michael, you have gotten yourself into something that you are not ready for. So I thought I was, tough, on the streets of Brooklyn. But I since learned real quick that same morning that I wasn't the toughest thing walking around. But I have to this day an enormous appreciation for the Marine Corps and for what the Marine Corps did for me as a young man, being as troubled as I was. So I navigated boot camp. I did get recycled, and that's really not a good thing. When you get recycled, it means you were either probably belligerent, they saw potential, but you weren't performing at the level they needed to see for whatever reason. Me, it was more so because I was belligerent and because I had a bad attitude. So I ended up getting recycled. I did not graduate with my original platoon. I graduated behind with the next platoon. But I did show them that I could do this thing. And I was told then, I don't know if they were just trying to make me feel good, but I was told that to graduate meritorious promotion to PFC after having been recycled just don't happen. But I graduated meritorious promotion PFC. While I was home after completing basic training, awaiting to go to my next assigned duty station for my training on the career path. Now, we called it an MOS, Military Occupational Specialty. But while I was awaiting to report to my next duty station for my MOS training, my stepdaddy passed away. He was in the hospital and he passed away. I requested from the Marine Corps an extension on my leave time, asking if I would be permitted to attend my stepdaddy's funeral with the family and then report to my duty station a little later than the assigned date and time. Well, that got denied. Now, I'm 17 years old. This is the daddy that I've known ever since I was probably 4 or 5 years old. This man raised me as his own child, loved me as though he was my biological father, provided for me in every respect of the word. And when the Marine Corps told me, we denied your request for extension of leave because he is not your biological father, and to date your biological father is still living. That didn't make any sense to me. And no matter how I said it, to try to get them to understand, this is the man that raised me. This is the man that showed me love unconditionally. This is the man that took care of me from the day that he met me up until this very moment. What do you mean?